Week 2 of the UFL season was a lot of fun. You had 3 games come down to the wire and end in exciting fashion. We saw an increase of fan attendance across the league, and the product on the field looked to only improve compared to last week. St. Louis looks to be the favorites to win it all this year, though they will have a tough game against DC next week in the Dome. Birmingham had a bounce-back week, Memphis showed a lot of improvement, and Wade Phillips made some entertaining comments during their broadcast on Fox. While the television viewership numbers have not been released at the time of recording, I remain cautiously hopeful they are an improvement from last week, and I hope we get to continue to see an upward trajectory in fan attendance at games as the season goes on. This is my Week 2 recap of the second season of the UFL. But before we get into this, if you enjoy UFL content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, let me know who your early season UFL champion pick is in the comment section below. In my opinion, although I'm a DC Defenders fan, it's hard to pick against St. Louis with how complete of a team they have looked this season. Heading into Week 2 of the season, the 3-time defending champions, Birmingham Stallions, were looking for an answer as for the first time since spring football returned, they would have a losing record with an 0-1 record after DC sacked quarterback Alex Magoo 8 times last weekend. Heading into the Stallions' Week 2 game against Michigan, the Panthers were confident after a great defensive performance against Memphis in their Week 1 matchup. Many looked for starting quarterback Bryce Perkins to put up highlights once again after impressive Week 1. After being shaken up by a big hit at the end of the first half last week, Danny Etling was healthy and ready to go as well. Birmingham went 3-0 against Michigan last year, including beating them in the playoffs, but this week's matchup being the Panthers' home opener in Detroit, Michigan would enter the game as 1-point favorites, even though Birmingham opened as a 1.5-point favorites. Michigan entered the game with one of the best rushing defenses and forced 2 interceptions and 3 sacks against Memphis. Alex Magoo looked to bounce back after struggling in Week 1. Heading into the game, Stallions head coach Skip Holtz told the media, "You know, it hasn't even really been a week since we last played. We are all disappointed in our performance in the opening game. Defensively, I thought we played well, but not great. We tried to keep the ball in front of us and learned more about our team and what our guys can do. On offense, this was probably our worst performance since we have been here in the past 3 seasons. We put up statistics from the past 3 seasons to show the players what we have accomplished, and the game on Sunday was the worst. I did think Alex did some good things, but we sometimes tried to make too much happen, which led to negative results. We have to calm down and play. The response from this team was exactly what I wanted. It was one of frustration, of wanting to get things corrected, and a sense of urgency at practice has been great all week. We have, far and away, had our best week of practice. What happened last week was a wake-up call for us. We can't just roll out the ball and beat anybody. Even last year, we won multiple one-score games. Even with as poorly as we played offensively last week, we had a chance to win with under a minute to play. We couldn't get it done. I don't mind losing a game as long as we can learn and grow from it." The Stallions look to get the running game going in Week 2's matchup. Tragedy would hit the Stallions on their first play of the game when Magoo would go down with an injury, leading to Matt Corral getting an opportunity. The next play, the Stallions would explode for a major rushing play to set up a field goal, give the Stallions a 3-0 lead. Michigan defensive back DJ Miller Jr. would play extremely well throughout the first half, and even though the 5'10 DB was covering a 6'5 tight end, he would even pick Corral off. Yet the Panthers' offense would also struggle, and right before half, the Stallions would make a huge punt return, setting up a goal and opportunity for Birmingham. The Stallions also almost blocked the punt. While the Stallions would get down to the 9-yard line, Michigan would stop them on 3rd and short, leading to a second field goal by Harrison Mevis to give Birmingham a 6-0 lead at half. Michigan would get the ball back with 25 seconds left and 2 timeouts, but wouldn't get anything going. At half, Perkins had 39 passing yards, while Corral had 68 passing yards and an interception. Person Jr. led the half in rushing yards with 40 rushing yards on 8 carries on the ground. Birmingham was out-rushing Michigan 54-22 on the ground and 122 yards to 63 yards overall. Birmingham also got to the quarterback twice and had 2 tackles for loss, while Michigan just had 3 tackles for loss. It was a hard-fought defensive battle in the first half. The offense would continue to struggle for Michigan as on the 3rd and 4 on their opening drive of the second half, Perkins would throw a pick on a tip pass to A.J. Thomas, who would lateral the ball to Perion Winfrey, setting up their offense just outside the 20. On a completion to Sternberger, he would get a pancake block by the wide receiver, helping him get down to the 2-yard line. Birmingham would finally find the end zone with a run out of the wing tee to Persons to give Birmingham a 12-0 lead. Finally, Michigan would get their offense going with some key rushing plays led by McCrary, but Birmingham would stop them on 4th and goal from the 1-yard line, continuing their shutout. They could not get into the end zone even though they had 1st and goal from the 2-yard line. The Stallions would drive down the field as Corral would go 7 for 7 in the 3rd quarter. On the first play of the 4th quarter, Corral would connect with Deion Kane on a strike to give the Stallions a dominant 18-0 lead, with the game feeling over with how Birmingham's defense was playing. Michigan would respond with a great drive where Perkins would break out of a sack and found Sims in the end zone. With a roughing the passer call, the Panthers would go for 3, and Perkins found the end zone to make it 18-9. Corral would struggle on the next drive and threw his 2nd interception to Miller, the first player to have 2 picks in a game in the UFL history, and the Panthers were alive once again. The Panthers had multiple shots to get the ball back, but a questionable punt on 4th and 3 and a muff punt after the defense got a key stop would sink the Panthers' ship. The Stallions would get their first win of the season, 21-12. They extended their winning streak over Michigan to 6 straight. Corral finished the game throwing for 198 yards, a touchdown and 2 interceptions, while their defense held the Panthers to 252 total yards, finishing with 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss. Detroit would have their best attendance since the UFL merger, bringing in 10,048 fans, and it was a fun game that came down to the wire. I can't wait to watch what happens the rest of the weekend. The Defenders surprised a lot of people last week when they shut down an often explosive Birmingham Stallions offense and got to Magoo 8 times on the day, leading to their upset win over the 3-time defending champions. Teamu looked good for the most part, but the offense struggled in the red zone against the stout Birmingham defense. While Abram Smith did not put up big numbers on the stat sheet in his return from injury after missing all of the 2024 season with the torn ACL, he came up big in the pass game, doing great in pass protection. Ty Scott led the team in receptions while Chris Rowland found himself in the end zone for the Defenders' first and only touchdown so far this season. Although Reggie Barlow stepped down right before the start of the season, this team looked more like their 2023 iteration as compared to their 2024 iteration under interim head coach Shannon Harris. Memphis, on the other hand, struggled against Michigan but almost found a way to win the game before a Troy Williams interception to end the game. Head coach Ken Wisenhunt returned from personal reasons. Coming into this week, many wondered whether E.J. Perry or Troy Williams would get the start, with E.J. Perry getting the start. DC entered the game 6.5-point favorites, as the Beer Snake and the Defenders crowd looked to have another roarous day. Memphis drove down the field, but E.J. Perry threw a pick to Keandre Thompson out of cover 1 early in the game. E.J. Perry was struggling with an abdominal strain throughout the day, but once again Memphis drove down the field, but got shot down inside the 10, would set up a field goal to go up 3-0 early. DC had an opportunity for a touchdown, but Mickens would drop the ball, the first of many huge drops or missed throws by Teamu on the day. It would take until the 8:35 mark in the 2nd quarter for DC to even get into Memphis' territory. Teamu came up short on a scramble, and DC would get a field goal to tie the game with 4:33 left in the half. DC had another touchdown, but Teamu missed Rowland this time, and Memphis would muff the punt, with DC recovering. Unfortunately, DC would drive down the field, but would only get a field goal to go up 6-3 at half. Teamu looked off throughout the first half, going 7 for 14, passing for 74 yards, and missed on some golden opportunities. He continued to struggle in the second half, as DC would go up 9-3 on their opening second half drive with another field goal. Memphis drove down the field and made it a 9-6 game, but Teamu entered the 4th quarter going 9 for 22 passing, just looking off throughout the day. DC missed a field goal, giving Memphis a golden opportunity as they would drive down the field and scored on an E.J. Perry scramble 12-9. Finally, Teamu hit a big pass to Rowland, and DC would score a touchdown with 8:21 left on a passing play and would get the 2-point conversion on a trick play to go up 17-12. Memphis would have 2 shots to win, but a blocked field goal and a stop on a razzle-dazzle play ended the game, with the Defenders coming out with a 17-12 ugly win in a defensive battle once again. Teamu would finish the game completing 12 of his 26 passes for 152 yards and 1 touchdown, as Abram Smith led the team in rushing with 55 yards on 16 carries and a long of 9 yards. E.J. Perry looked way more comfortable under the Wisenhunt play calling, completing 18 of his 28 passes for 205 yards and 1 touchdown, while also rushing for 26 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Overall, Memphis would outgain DC 308 yards to 257 yards, but DC would win in the rushing game, rushing for 113 yards compared to Memphis's 103 yards. The defenders would not get to parry for a sack, but did have 5 tackles for a loss for 8 yards, while Memphis had 1 sack and 3 tackles for loss on the day. The paid attendance would also be impressive, as DC sold 13,142 tickets for this game. The third game of the week would see the Arlington Renegades take on the Houston Roughnecks, and to be honest, there really isn't much to be said about this game, as this would be an insane defensive battle. Although Arlington came in as 11.5-point favorites. It was a cold day in Arlington, as some of the reported touchdowns were in the 30s and low 40s. Arlington was coming off a rough start to last season, starting 0-6 last year, but this season they look completely different, with the return of Luis Perez and a returning of a roster but a changing mindset. But to show how little there really was to talk about this game, my first line in my notes for this game was that there was a great punt by Marquette King on the first drive that pinned the Houston Roughnecks on the 2-yard line. Arlington would get a huge stop, as Houston was unable to really do anything on the drive, as Anthony Brown once again looked off. Many wondered whether Nolan Henderson or Brown would get the start, as Henderson looked a whole lot better in the season opener, but Curtis Johnson would stick with Anthony Brown for the second game of the season. On the punt by Houston, Arlington would get a great return to the 30-yard line, and it looked like there were 2 big pass plays by Luis Perez, but an overturn as an incompletion would change that. Arlington would take a 3-0 lead with a field goal. It would be a while for anything big to happen, but then Justin Hall would have a big run on a wide receiver screen, but a reviewed block in the back after a challenge would move the ball back to the 47-yard line. The biggest talking point throughout the second quarter was the fact that throughout the early part of the first quarter and the second quarter, the ESPN clock just was not showing on the scoreboard. I know it's a small little issue, but this is ESPN running a broadcast, and if they want to show the UFL matters and that this is an important product to watch, it's a mistake that can't be done with how little opportunities to get the casual fan involved. Arlington running back Day Hunter would have 2 big carries towards the end of the half, but Arlington was unable to get any points out of that. Houston would kick a field goal with 7 seconds left to tie the game right before half, and held the ball for 15 minutes and 11 seconds in the first half, so you would have expected more out of the Houston offense. Once again, there really wouldn't be much to talk about until Sal Cannella had a huge catch, but took a big hit and fumbled the ball, but the next play Anthony Brown threw a pick. Perez found Deontay Burnett on a fade with 10:31 left in the fourth quarter to take an 11-3 lead, and it looked like Arlington's offense was starting to heat up. Nolan Henderson would take over for Anthony Brown, but couldn't get anything going on 2 drives. But when Brown returned to the starting role in the last drive of the game, he would have 4 straight completions to close out the drive, scoring a touchdown, but just coming up short on the 2-point conversion, as it was his best drive of his early young UFL career. Houston would go for the 4th and 12 conversion, but Brown was unable to connect with Butler on the 4th and 12 conversion, and Arlington would win the game 11-9. Anthony Brown finished the game with 146 passing yards, a touchdown and an interception, while Luis Perez finished with 211 yards and a touchdown. Day Hunter led the day in rushing with 14 attempts for 63 yards, while Brown led Houston's rushing attack with 20 yards on 3 attempts. Arlington would get 298 total yards, while Houston would be held to 192 total yards and 63 rushing yards on the ground, while Arlington had 100 rushing yards on the ground. Arlington sacked the quarterback twice and had 5 tackles for loss, while Houston had more sacks on the day with 3 sacks and 9 tackles for loss. It was an impressive defensive battle that was fun to watch, the third game of the week that came down to the final few seconds to decide the winner. Arlington saw a paid attendance of 9,582 fans. For the last game of week 2, it would see the St. Louis Battlehawks take on the San Antonio Brahmas, which would be St. Louis's home opener at the Dome, and if you know anything about the Dome, it is always rocking, as they led it in a UFL attendance last year and look to be doing the same again this year. This game, though, would end up being a blowout, as St. Louis would dominate throughout the day. St. Louis would come into the game as 7.5-point favorites, and Manny Wilkins and Jacob Sailors were both looking to have big days like they did in week 1. Kellerman and the Brahmas offense looked to rebound after struggling in week 1 against Arlington, and their defense also looked for a bounce back after leading the league in defense last year and struggling against Arlington last week. On their second offensive drive, Sailors and Wilkins would look really good, but they would end up getting a field goal going up 3-0. St. Louis's defense would dominate San Antonio's offense throughout the day, and they would get the ball back, and St. Louis would get the first touchdown of the day with a run by Sailors after a dominant drive to go up 11-0. The Battlehawks defense looked amazing early, and Manny Wilkins connected with Gary Jennings with a great deep route. Sailors would find the end zone to give St. Louis a 17-0 lead to give him his second touchdown of the day. Right before half, San Antonio's offense came alive towards the end of the half, but would only get a destroying field goal to go into half down 17-3. Through the first two games, St. Louis had outscored opponents 35-3 in the first half. The Battlehawks would drive down the field on their first drive of the second half, and Sailors would get into the end zone for his third touchdown of the day to give San Antonio a dominant 23-3 lead. Anthony McFarland of San Antonio would finally have a big run, and they would go on it for fourth, and Kirkland would take it down to the 1-yard line to set up the San Antonio offense with a golden opportunity to score their first touchdown of the day. Joshua Corbin would get San Antonio's only touchdown of the day, and when San Antonio was finally getting hot, the Battlehawks would force a really bad decision by Mond and would pick him off to give St. Louis an even more dominant chance to take an even bigger lead. San Antonio would hold St. Louis to a field goal to go up 26-9, so they still technically were alive with the way the extra point system works in the UFL. The Battlehawks, though, would get a red zone 4th and down stop, and that would be the last hope of San Antonio, as St. Louis would go on to win the game 26-9. Manny Wilkins looked good throughout the day, throwing for 162 yards and rushing for 58 yards on 9 attempts, never really liking to slide throughout the day. Sailors had 3 touchdowns as well as having 46 yards on 11 carries, averaging 4.2 yards per carry. Anthony McFarland led the way for San Antonio with 55 yards on 6 carries, and Kellen Mond would finish the day throwing for 129 yards and 1 interception, completing 13 of his 27 passes. The big story once again was Manny Wilkins just being able to complete a majority of his passes, completing 75% of his passes today after completing over 77% of his passes last week. The St. Louis defense dominated all day, holding San Antonio to 223 total yards of offense and 112 rushing yards on the day, as the Battlehawks also outperformed with penalties, as once again San Antonio struggled in that category, finishing the day with 10 penalties. St. Louis found the quarterback 4 times for 18 yards and had 4 tackles for a loss, while San Antonio had 1 sack and 8 tackles for a loss themselves. The big story of the day also has to be giving credit to where credit is due, as the big hog mollies up front for the Battlehawks looked amazing all day, as this looks to be the best offensive line this season. The Battlehawks look scary heading into week 3 of the season, but will have a major matchup that I'm so excited to watch, as the DC Defenders come to town to take on the Battlehawks for the nightcap of the game on Sunday. St. Louis once again had amazing attendance, having a paid attendance of 32,115 fans. All these attendance numbers come from the great Mike Mitchell, who does a great job covering the UFL. While recording this video, the TV numbers have not been released by Mitchell, so I don't have those numbers to share. Overall, week 2 was an amazing improvement by the UFL, as they saw an attendance increase to a weekly average of 16,222 fans, though that average is kind of skewed by St. Louis's number, but saw a jump in attendance by DC and saw the best attendance by Michigan all season long. Arlington did see a drop-off of fans from week 1 to week 2 though. I overall feel great about where the product is going and can't wait to see where the rest of the season is going. My early favorites to win the UFL title after 2 weeks of the season has to be St. Louis, and for the league's sake, since they're hosting the title game in St. Louis once again, I hope they can find their way to the championship game, although I would love to see the Defenders win the title this year. Birmingham rebounded, Michigan showed some sparks, but came up short against Birmingham. EJ Perry and Memphis looked a whole lot better. Kellen Mond looked better compared to this week compared to last week, as he showed some flashes throughout the day. But the biggest question mark is Houston, whose defense showed up this week, but their offense continued to struggle. Can Anthony Brown get better in week 3, or will they hand the ball over to Nolan Henderson? I hope the TV numbers are up, and I'm slightly hopeful, with my only concerning TV number probably going to be Saturday, with the DC Defenders Memphis game competing in an amazing Final Four with March Madness. I think the UFL is going to show growth this season, and I remain hopefully optimistic, and I can't wait for week 3 of the season to keep recapping the season. If you enjoy these videos, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as I can continue to recap the rest of the season if that's what y'all want. I love the UFL and want to see them succeed, and I hope coverage on this channel, as well as coverage overall, will only help the league furthermore. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out one of my other videos YouTube thinks you will love right here. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember to embrace the grind.